Welcome, Liz. Thank you very much for coming and exhibiting here at Textiles.
My pleasure, Anne.
I'm really interested to know about your experience as a weaver. What's brought you to being able to produce such beautiful pieces?
Well, in a way I fell into weaving, and it was quite a change in my practice. But as soon as I started weaving, it was such a logical system that I found was really suited my way of working and the kinds of things I wanted to do, because I could create very individual structures. I could create things that expressed my ideas and showed off various qualities and materials I was using. I was able to create two-dimensional, three-dimensional structures. Weaving is a three-dimensional structure with the interlacing of warp and weft, but the way that I was taught weaving was to develop a structure appropriate for what you wanted to do. The focus then was on furnishing fabrics, but once I set up my studio, I've used those same parameters to develop very individual pieces. And I guess that's been the driving force of my practice for over 30 years now, is that I've been creating things which they do come from a weaving tradition, and I'm clearly developing on that weaving tradition, but I'm using it in a way that gives me quite an individual outcome. And I guess the best way of explaining that is in the loop series. One of the neck piece that I'm wearing is a three-dimensional piece using cotton and round threads plus leather lacing, and it is creating quite a structure. It's like a ribbed circular structure that it's creating, and it's coming together of the way it's been woven and the materials and the ideas that have been driving it, which is at that stage it was essentially protection and trying to create a theoretical protective environment. And so from the loop series, a number of the pieces in this exhibition have developed. The series called Curve is very similar structure, but it's using different materials. The ones behind me are actually it's still the same idea of protection, but they're really coming out of the rag rug tradition of what people creating objects for their home out of materials or garments that were readily available, and garments and old clothes were cut up and woven, cut up into strips and woven into rugs. And so that's what I've been doing with this. Two pieces behind me are called Shadows of the Wardrobe. They're old clothes and other textiles, some over-dyed, mostly black, dark. But it really is a relook at the rag rug tradition. And rag rugs were some of the first things that I wove when I first learned to weave in the late 70s.
And are there particular materials that just make your heart beat a bit faster when you start putting it onto the loom?
It is interesting, and for a lot of my practice, for quite a while, I guess from the late 70s into the early 90s, I essentially wove wraps and scarves in the studio, and that's the main thing that the studio produced. And that was out of wool, fine worsted wool. And look, I think of any one material, that's the one that is magical. You can do so much with wool, and it is very forgiving. It's very easy to work with. So that's the one material that I've used for many, many years. More recently, I've worked with different types of wool. Woolen spun wool for felted pieces. I've woven with strips of fabric, or either repurposed fabric of various types, but a lot of them, and some of them now, are plant-dyed silk that's been cut and woven, cut into strips and woven, and then also leather lacing. So in the last little while, I've become much more diverse in terms of materials.
And what does the future look like for you, Liz? What sorts of areas are you thinking you might move into?
Well, the future's looking good because my position at the University of New South Wales has changed slightly, and I now am no longer in a senior admin position. So I'll have more time in the studio, and I'm hoping to develop new work, technically new work. And the first project I'm wanting to undertake is to bring together all the little strands of research that I've done in India when I've visited regularly in the last 10 or so years with groups of students, and as part of a course I've worked with artisans there for production, wraps and scarves. So I'm wanting to work with artisans on art pieces, wall hangings, which will reflect on these various strands of research that I've done, which have included some of the very early documentation of Indian textiles, documentation which was really for the purpose of promotion in Europe. Also, I've looked at some of the early European and American designers going to India and the impact they had on Indian weaving. And then just generally my response to decoration and motives and the way that I see Indian textiles, which is some of the most beautiful textiles. They're very capable artisans, very skilled weavers, and so it is. These are the areas that I want to draw together with a new series of work.
And have you found over the last 20 odd years that you've been a weaver that there's a particular inspiration in terms of a book or an artist or music that you keep going back to that reinvigorates you or you re-find your creativity with?
I guess there's been particular things at certain times. When I was first in Sydney in the mid-80s, I was weaving, looking at African textiles, and at that time the Kronos Quartet had fantastic music, and I think the CD was called Out of Africa. It's a name similar, I think that's a film, but it's a similar. But it was my interest in kente cloth and African textiles and Kronos Quartet's music came together, and that was very instrumental at that time. I'm a great Leonard Cohen lover, and I think he's in the darkness in a lot of my textiles I see linked with his music, and I play that endlessly in the studio. It's really music rather than books, but then, I mean, I'm an avid acquirer of books, and recently I've acquired books on some of the very particular textiles. Again, they're linked with India, but this beautiful book on muslin and the way that the muslin cloth has been developed. Books on ornamentation written by people who've researched Indian textiles. So they've come together, whether there's not necessarily just one.
Thank you.